Welcome everyone, I'm Mrs. Odom and we're going to go over the 7 elements of art. The first element is line. A line is a point in continuous motion. Lines can be literal and they can be expressive. The different types of lines are a straight line, a wavy line, a zigzag, diagonals, dashed lines, dotted lines, scribbles, curves, and a zentangle is a collection of a variety of lines. So here, when you look at these circles, well, they look like circles, but they're not complete circles. You see all curved lines here. They're all curved and they don't close. Sometimes lines close, sometimes lines do not. Here is an example of an image just using lines. So you have thick lines here and you have thin lines there, and you have some zigzags and you have some waves a little bit, but they're all made of lines. And these are shoes, this is a gate, and this is the floor. And then you also see an example of all different types of lines here. It's all just lines. You have scribbles in the back, you have straight lines to show some shadow, diagonal lines, some thick and thin lines here. You even have lines to make stripes on his shirt. And then you have thick lines and thin lines for the outline of the characters. Okay, those are examples of weight, line weight. So that line weight means it's either thick or thin. Okay, here you see some zentangles. Here's some examples of some zentangles, the different designs and types of lines. These are dotted lines here, which is really not a line, it's just a dot, but a line is a dot that keeps on going. There's some straight and curved lines. Here are some scribbles, okay? And in here you see also another image of all types of lines. You have curved lines, you have zigzags on her kimono sleeve, you have curves and very jagged weighted lines, and you have straight parallel lines, thick and thin. It's a whole variety of lines here just to create this one piece. And even in color, you have dots behind her, you have white lines on the outside of the cloud, and you have the background that's purely made of different types of lines. The next element is shape. Shape is a flat closed line with 2 dimensions. That means it goes up and down, or how tall it is, or it goes left and right, which is the width or how thick it is. Shapes can be geometric or organic. So geometric means it has a name, like a circle or hexagon, pentagon, square, rectangle, things of that nature, usually names of shapes that you have in math class. An organic shape are shapes that do not have a name, or it's an irregular shape, like shapes of nature. Here in this picture, you have a sun and you have mountains. The sun is a geometric shape. It's a circle. And the mountains are irregular shapes, so they're organic, or you can say in a way that they're somewhat abstract, but you can tell that they are meant to be mountains because they are brown. Now, if it was blue, you could say it was water, but in this instance, they are mountains. You can also see here that other elements in this piece are used as well. You have lines, which are white wavy lines. You have color. You have shape, which is here. And then you also have space, and we'll go over space in a little bit. Here are some examples of shape. These are all organic abstract shapes. This is all organic, which means it doesn't really have a name. They're funny looking shapes. Even the star is not regular. Same thing with this circle. It's off just a little bit, so it's not a perfect circle. Okay. Here in this piece, it's called 2D because it's only in 2 dimensions like a Mario game. So you see how tall they are, and you see how thick they are and how wide, but you don't know how deep it goes. Everything is very flat. Same thing with these women's tops. They're very, very flat. So these are in 2D, and the rest of the painting is in 3D, which is form, and we'll go over that on the next element. The next element is form. Form is a shape with 3 dimensions. That's height, which is up and down, or how tall it is, width, left to right, or how wide it is, or depth, which is how deep something is, or how far back it goes. Any object that is a sculpture is automatically a form, but a painting or a drawing can have form as well. There are different elements in a form. You have the volume, which is the height, length, and depth of the subject. And then you have the mass, how heavy something is or how much it takes up the space. In this image here, you see a cylinder and a sphere. So this is no longer a shape, it's no longer a rectangle, and this is no longer a circle. Because they added depth to it here when they put a hole in it, and they added roundness, this is now a form, and it casts a shadow. This is also a form as well because you can see that it's round. You can see some examples of form here. So you can see the flowers, and the girl is holding the flowers. They have roundness, and you can see that it goes around in a circle, so this is form. Here you can see the shadows and the roundness of the bottle, the jagged edges of the pentagons. You see some shapes there. There's a pentagon. You see the book has it's taking up some space. Here is actually a flat picture. So it's a real pencil, but the piece of paper is flat. So he drew a sphere on a flat piece of paper to look like it's coming out of the page. So it has depth coming out of the page. This is a sculpture. All sculptures are forms because they have height, they have width, and they have depth. So you can see how far back this piece goes. If it was a vase, it would also have form because you can see how deep the vase is. Here is a painting. So her background is 2D and the woman is 3D. So the background is shapes. These are organic shapes. And her body form and the dress and her hair are forms. You can see shadows. You can see how round it is. They used value, which we will go over in a little bit, to create the sense of depth in this form. The next element is value. Value is the relative lightness and darkness of a form or a surface. It's usually in terms of highlights, midtones, and dark tones. So the highlight is the lightest tone of the piece, or usually where the light source is hitting the object. The midtone is the middle base tone of the subject, and it's usually between the highest highlight and the darkest tone. A dark tone is the darkest tone of the subject or the piece, or it's where there's the shadow or away from the light source. So you see in this picture here, you have my circle there, which is a sphere. The light source is coming from above. So that's where your highlights are going to be. Okay, and then the mid-tone is in the middle. So you have them here, here. It's your second darkest tone. And then you have your dark tones, which is the darkest, or your shadow. And then you have your actual shadows. Value is not always dealing with light sources. It sometimes is the darkest and the lightest tone in the picture. So here on the table is the mid-tone, and then here in the wall or it could be a deep space, it's the darkest tone. Here's some examples of how value is used. In this case, you can see it's very, very dark here, so there are the shadows. And then you have the midtones, and you have the highlight of his fingers and hands, because that's where the light is hitting his hands. Here is a piece that I did with me, my husband, and my daughter. And I used a reference to tell me where the highlights are. So the light was hitting from above us. And so you see I have no lines where the highlights are. And I have a little bit of lines where the midtones are. And I have a lot of lines to create shadows for the dark tones. This is an actual sculpture to show you how highlights are on actual pieces. So this is the highlight where the light is hitting the sculpture, the midtones, and the dark tones, which is where the shadow hits. Here's another example of how value is used on a portrait or on a picture of a person. This here is called a value scale. So the lightest color is your highlight. All the colors in between are your midtones, and then your darkest color is your dark tone. These are some examples of what those levels of values are called. The next element is space. Space is the placement of forms within the picture plane. The types of space are basically how you describe what one thing is in relationship to another. So you have above, below, next to, behind, on top of, underneath, overlapped, in front of, different kinds of prepositions basically. In this piece here, you see that you have a whole bunch of circles. You notice we're using a lot of circles. There's circles within a circle, circles in front of circles, circles next to circles, on top of, above, next to, perpendicular to, things like that. Now this is a 2D image, so you can't see how far back something goes, but you can tell that they're not right on top of each other. They're not the same image, they're above. There are different types of space examples. There's the silhouette. Like this is sort of a silhouette, so it has no definition, and it's the positive and negative space of a subject on the picture plane. Then you have perspective, which gives the illusion of depth in a space from a specific viewpoint. This does not have any perspective. It's very flat. 3D images or images with form usually have perspective. And then you have foreshortening, which is extreme perspective, and is the extreme shortening of a portion of a subject to show that it is closer or further away. And we'll look at some examples. Here we see pure perspective. This is a piece where you can see that there's a viewpoint in the center, and then it goes far back, even though this is a flat painting. You see light sources, you see depth, you see a lot of the scholars taking up the space. They're next to each other, below each other, on the stairs, in front of each other. They have shadows, all these things, and even the sculptures up here, you can see that they're above, okay? In this piece, you see it's the same one we saw earlier. It's space. These mountains are behind each other or in front of each other, depending on how you look at it, and the sun is above the mountains. This is an example of silhouette. Silhouette is just the shape of things. So the positive space is usually depicted by a color or by black, and the negative space is usually what is white. Okay, same thing with here. The sun is a silhouette of a sun, and the sky represents the negative space. You see these examples here as well. This is an example of foreshortening. So you can see his hands are really, really big and his head is really small. So it just lets you know that his hands are really, really close to you and his head goes really far back. So this is an example of foreshortening. Here we have a piece that really shows some space very well. So you can see the houses are in the back, so that's perspective. And then you have the fruits and vegetables that show a good example of space. So they're next to each other, they're in front of each other, overlapping each other a little bit. They're very close to each other. And then she's between the baskets, okay? The next element is color. Color is what we see due to reflected light. It can also represent mood and the tone of your piece. The different types of color, the different components of color are hue, which is the name of the color, the intensity, which is the strength or the saturation of the color, and the value, which is the lightness and the darkness of the color. So if we look here at my circle example, you have the hue, which is green, the intensity, which is not very intense, like a medium intensity, because it's not very bold in color. And then you have the value, which is this light green, medium green, and dark green. So dark green is the lowest value and light green is the highest value. Then different types of intensity, you have shade. Here's when you add black or add a very dark color, you add black. You change a color with tone when you add gray. So there are no examples of adding gray here. It just mutes the color and brings down the saturation of the color. And then you have tint. So tint makes the color lighter. So you add white. So tint was used here. Shade was used here and here. And you can say that tone was added to the whole piece because it's not very strong in intensity. Monochrome means it's all one color. So this is all one hue, which is green. So it's a monotone piece. Here are some examples of how color is used. This here is a monochrome piece. Monochrome means one color. This sculpture here is a chair that uses a high intensity. So it's the purest color of red, yellow, blue, and black. That means no white was added, no black was added, no gray was added. It is the exact color as it comes. These are also very high intense colors here. And these are very subdued colors, so the intensity is not as strong. Same here, very intense, not so intense. But this is also another example of a monochrome piece. It's all brown. The next element is texture. Texture is what a form or sculpture actually or visually feels like. Examples are a rugged sculpture, because the sculpture can have texture on it, the drawing of a glass ball, or a painting with woolly yarn on it. So it can be actual texture or it can be implied texture. Here in this piece here, you can see that it might feel smooth if you were able to touch it, but this is a painting, this is a drawing. So it looks like it would be very smooth and sleek, and it looks like it's a glass ball. So there are different types of texture. There's soft, spiky, shiny, cracked, hairy, slimy, wrinkled, sharp, smooth, all types of adjectives. And we'll look at some examples. Here you can see her. They use a lot of texture on her, like her skin. You can see the softness of her skin and that her dress is not is very soft if you were to touch it, and her hair is shiny. Here you can see coconuts. It looks very rough, and then the nut part of the coconut is smooth, and this is just a drawing. This can be two types of texture. It could be actual texture if you were able to touch it, if it were really folded pieces of paper. But if it was a picture of folded paper, you wouldn't be able to touch it, so it's implied. And then you have abstract texture, so it's not an actual texture, but it looks very rough and rugged, so it gives it texture. This is a sculpture, so it's smooth at the top and it feels very rugged at the bottom. So that is your texture. Here is a review of all the 7 elements of art using my circle. Here's the line, where you have it used a curved line, and it's a point in continuous motion. So you take this point and you put it in motion. Then you have the shape, which is 2D, and it goes up and down for the height and left to right for the width. So this is a 2D image of the sun and the mountains. The sun is geometric and the mountains are organic. Here you have form. So this circle is now a sphere because you can see that it's round, and you can also see that this rectangle is now a cylinder because it has depth and it has roundness. So it's a 3D shape. It has height, width, and depth. Here you have space, and it tells you what the circles are in relation to each other, above, to the left of, behind, next to, things like that. Here you have value, and it tells you how the lightness and darkness, sometimes in relation to a light source. So the light source is coming from above because that's where the highlights are. And then you also have the very dark background and midtones of the table. So the highlights are the lightest lights, and the shadows are the darkest darks, and the midtones are the colors in between. Then you have color. The hue of this is green, which is the name of the color. The intensity is not very intense, which is the saturation of the color. And then you have the value, the light green and dark green. This piece is monochrome, which means it's all one color. And here you have texture. It gives me the illusion that I can touch this and it will feel smooth. Here you go. Line, shape, form, space, value, color, and texture. These are your 7 elements of art. So this is a quiz that you will take. It is in relation to the video, so I would suggest that you watch the video first or look at the slides. There is a slideshow, or the notes that you have taken. It's just 10 questions. It should not be very hard, and you may take the quiz more than once. Then for your classwork, you will find images, open Padlet from Google Classroom or whatever you're opening Padlet from if I send you a link. Find images for each element of art. So you should have 7 elements, and you're going to explain briefly how each element are being used. Then you're going to find another artist on Padlet and comment on one of the images that they use. So you should have 7 images, 7 descriptions, and 7 comments. When you're finished, they will all be uploaded on Padlet. And then for your project for this, you're going to find one subject. You can have other subjects within that category, but you have to have one similar subject in all of your elements. Draw each element using that one subject. So you're like, for instance, in this example, she drew some ice cream, and there's 7 examples of ice cream for the 7 elements. And you have to label each section. There's no label on this one, but you must have a label. I'm assuming the label is on the back, but I prefer you to have the label on the front since it will be uploaded onto the computer. You will take a picture, load it to Padlet using the link in Google Classroom. Then you're going to comment on one artist in each element. You do not have to describe your piece, but you will talk about someone else's piece. You give an overall overview, which is the compliment with an example, a suggestion, and a kudos. So if I were to talk about texture, which is this right here, I would put, you use texture very well. I like how you used balled up paper. Maybe consider using darker values next time. Great job. So the artist knows that I'm talking about her texture element and what I liked about it. And then my suggestion would of how she used it. Must have a suggestion that everyone has room for improvement because we're all learners, even me, Mrs. Odom, I'm a learner. And then you want to give a nod and, great work, thumbs up, all right? And be very creative. You must use color, okay? Look at your rubric and have lots of fun. All right, bye now.